However, Udayan, there are 5 other qualities because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me. What are the 5? The first one is the higher virtue. Here, Udayan, my disciples esteem me for the higher virtue, higher moral conduct, sila. The recluse Gautama is virtuous. He possesses the supreme aggregate of virtue. This is the first quality because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me. So the first one the Buddha says, his moral conduct is without blemish. You cannot find any fault at all with his moral conduct. Second one is knowledge and vision. Again, Udayan, my disciples esteem me for my excellent knowledge and vision thus. When the recluse Gautama says, I know, he truly knows. When he says, I see, he truly sees. The recluse Gautama teaches the Dhamma through direct knowledge, not without direct knowledge. He teaches the Dhamma with a sound basis, not without a sound basis. He teaches the Dhamma in a convincing manner, not in an unconvincing manner. This is the second quality because of which my disciples honor me. Third one is the higher wisdom. Again, Udayan, my disciples esteem me for the higher wisdom thus. The recluse Gautama is wise. He possesses the supreme aggregate of wisdom. It is impossible that he should not foresee the future courses of doctrine, or that he should not be able to confute with reasons the current doctrines of others. What do you think, Udayan? Would my disciples, knowing and seeing thus, break in and interrupt me? No, Venerable Sir. I do not expect instruction from my disciples. Invariably, it is my disciples who expect instruction from me. This is the third quality because of which my disciples honor me. This third quality, I must know, because the Buddha is psychic. What his disciples think, he can already read their mind. So none of them dare to question the Buddha, argue with the Buddha. The fourth one is the Four Noble Truths. Again, Udayan, when my disciples have met with suffering and become victims of suffering, prey to suffering, they come to me and ask me about the noble truth of suffering. Being asked, I explain to them the noble truth of suffering, and I satisfy their minds with my explanation. They ask me about the noble truth of the origin of suffering, about the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, about the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Being asked, I explain to them the noble truth, and I satisfy their minds with my explanation. This is the fourth quality because of which my disciples honor me. So these are the 4 qualities. The fifth one is very long. The fifth one is the Buddha gives a list of the way to develop wholesome states that he has taught. If I were to go through all this in detail, it would take a long time, so I will just go to the main topics. The first one is the 4 foundations of mindfulness or recollection. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 4 intense states of mindfulness or recollection, satipatthana. Here, among abides contemplating the body in the body, etc. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 4 right kinds of striving, samappadana. Here among awakens zeal for the non-arising of unarisen, evil, unwholesome states, and makes effort, rouses energy, exerts his mind and strives, etc., etc. So these are 4 right kinds of striving. Third one is the 4 bases for psychic power, idipada. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 4 bases for psychic power. Here among develops a basis for psychic power consisting in concentration due to zeal, etc. Then the 5 faculties. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 5 spiritual faculties. Here among develops the faculty of faith, energy, mindfulness or recollection, concentration, wisdom. And then after that, 5 powers. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 5 powers. Here among develops the power of faith, energy, mindfulness or recollection, concentration and wisdom. Then the 7 enlightenment factors. Again, Udayan, I proclaim to my disciples the way to develop the 7 enlightenment factors. Here among develops the enlightenment factor of recollection, investigation of Dhamma, energy, delight, tranquility, concentration, equanimity, and then after that the Noble Eightfold Path. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. Here a monk develops right view, right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right recollection, and right concentration. And thereby many disciples of mine abide, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. Stop here for a moment. So here, you see, the Buddha says in other suttas, this is the most important part of his teachings when it comes to practicing the path to liberation. What are these? These are called the 37 Bodhipakya Dhamma. I think, what's the translation? Bodhipakya Dhamma. Wings to enlightenment. Now, this, how do you get 37? You have the 4 Satipatthana, 4 Samappadana, and 4 Iddhipada, that's 16, and 5 faculties and 5 powers, total 26, and then 7 enlightenment factors and Noble Eightfold Paths. So you add them up, you get 37. But in another sutta, the Buddha says, if you practice the Noble Eightfold Path fully, completely, you will also at the same time would have developed the 37 Bodhipakya Dhamma. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 8 liberations. Possessed of material form, one sees form. This is the first liberation. Not perceiving form internally, one sees forms externally. One is resolved only upon the beautiful. And then after that, the base of infinite space, base of infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, base of neither perception nor non-perception, then cessation of perception and feeling. These are the 8 liberations now. Now, I want to mention something here. These 8 liberations, in the commentaries, they say these 8 liberations refers, the first 3 refers to the 4 jhanas. Having attained the 4 jhanas, then he can attain the first 3. He sees forms, then he sees forms externally, and then resolve upon the beautiful. And then after that is followed by the 4 arupa jhanas and cessation of perception and feeling. But this contradicts the Anguttara Nikaya 4.89 where they talk about the blue lotus recluse. So these 8 liberations is not talking about the 4 rupa jhanas. It only talks about the 4 arupa jhanas and cessation. Because they have used this to say that the Arhan liberated by wisdom does not possess the jhanas. That is wrong, because if you read this Anguttara Nikaya Sutta 4.89 about the blue lotus recluse, then you can see the contradiction. Okay, again Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 8 bases for transcendence. Perceiving form internally, one sees form externally, limited, fair and ugly. Perceiving form internally, one sees form externally, immeasurable. Not perceiving form internally, one sees form externally, limited. Not perceiving form internally, one sees forms externally, immeasurable. Not perceiving form internally, one sees forms externally, blue in color. Not perceiving form internally, one sees form externally, yellow. Not perceiving form externally, one sees forms. Not perceiving form internally, one sees forms externally, red. And not perceiving form internally, one sees forms externally, white. So these are the 8 bases for transcendence. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 10 kasina bases. Stop here for a moment. These 10 kasina bases, in India, even the external ascetics also practice it. It is not unique to the Buddha's teachings. Even before the Buddha's time, yogis, meditators had already practiced it. So it is also one of the meditation methods of that the Buddha taught. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 4 jhanas. Here, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. Monk enters upon and abides in the 1st jhana. Similarly, 2nd jhana, 3rd jhana, 4th jhana. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to understand thus. This body of mine, made of material form, consisting of 4 great elements, procreated by mother and father, and built up out of boiled rice and porridge, is subject to impermanence, to being born and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. And this consciousness of mind is supported by it and bound up with it. So this one of the inside knowledges, abhinnas. And then after that, the mind-made body. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to create from this body another body having form, mind-made with all its limbs, lacking no faculty, just as though a man were to pull out a reed from its sheath and think thus, this is the sheath, this is the reed. The sheath is one, the reed is another. It is from the sheath that the reed has been pulled out. So too, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to create from this body another body having form. And then after that, the various kinds of psychic power, these psychokinesis. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to wield the various kinds of supernormal or psychic power. Having been one, one becomes many. Having been many, one becomes one. They appear and vanish. They go unhindered through walls, through enclosures, through mountains, as though through space. They dive in and out of earth as though it is water. They walk on water without sinking. Sitting cross-legged, they travel in space like a bird. With the hands, they touch and stroke the sun and moon. They wield mastery that means can fly, even as far as the Brahma world. And then after that, the divine ear element, or heavenly ear. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby, with the divine ear element, which is purified and surpasses the human, they hear both kinds of sounds, the divine and the human. And then reading the minds of others. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to understand the minds of other beings, of other persons, having encompassed them with their own minds. And after that, the recollection of past lives. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to recollect the manifold past lives. 1 birth, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 100, 1,000, hundreds of thousands, many aeons, world cycles of world contraction, many world cycles of world expansion, etc. And then the divine eye or heavenly eye. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby with the divine or heavenly eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, they see beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly. They understand how beings pass on according to their actions or karma. Then after that, destruction of the asavas or taints. Again, Udayan, I have proclaimed to my disciples the way whereby, by realizing for themselves with direct knowledge, they here and now enter upon and abide in the liberation by mind and liberation by wisdom that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. This, Udayan, is the 5th quality because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me. These, Udayan, are the 5 qualities because of which my disciples honor, respect and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me. This is what the Blessed One said. The wanderer Udayan was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. This last part, where the Buddha talks about the 8 knowledges, these are called the abhinnas. Sometimes they talk about 6 abhinnas. Here they talk about 8 abhinnas. First one is the inside knowledge of the body and the mind, how they are supported and bound up with each other. The second one is creating a mind-made body. The third one is various kinds of psychic power. The fourth is the heavenly ear. Fifth is reading the minds of others. 6 is recollecting past lives. 7 is the heavenly eye. The 8 is the destruction of the asavas. So the Buddha says that this 5th one, his disciples venerate, honor him because he can teach them all these things. The 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, the 8 liberations, the 8 bases for transcendence, the 10 kasinas, the 4 jhanas, and the 8 types of higher knowledge, abhinnas. So the Buddha says it's not because of ascetic practices that his disciples honor him, but because of these 5 things. The first one is the higher virtue, adi sila. The second one is knowledge and vision. Third one is the higher wisdom. Fourth, because it teaches the Four Noble Truths. And then the fifth is the way to develop wholesome states up to liberation. It's actually quite a long sutta.